Okay, so here we're looking at factoring polynomials. Last lesson we looked at common factors and how to factor things. Last chapter was on polynomials. We put the two ideas together, we have factoring polynomials. Here we have a question like this. You might get a question where it says factor 3x minus 12. Well, what does that mean? Factoring is like reverse multiplying, which is like dividing. And when we factor something, we're trying to pull out or remove from each of these terms a factor that is common to them. And you want to remove the greatest common factor to make your thing work in one step. So the first thing you should do is figure out what is the GCF, or greatest common factor, between 3x and 12. Now you can do it in your head if you knew how to do it from the last lesson, or if you don't remember or don't know how, take the two terms, 3x. What is 3 made of? 1 and 3. And that's it for the numbers. And 12 is made of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. Whoops, not 16, 6. In terms of the variables, the letters, we've got an x, and 12 doesn't have, this term doesn't have an x. What do they have in common? They both have a 3. No x in common here, only one of them has it. So the greatest common factor, the GCF, out of these two things is 3. That 3, what we're saying is we're going to divide each of these terms by 3. So we are going to remove 3 out of this binomial. When we do that, we're going to divide these two terms by 3. So what we're doing is going 3x divided by 3. What is 3x divided by 3? 3's cancel out. You're left with just x. So we're left with x. When you factor out 3 out of 12, which means we're dividing negative 12 by 3, what are you left with? Negative 4. So that leaves us with negative 4. And that's it. That's our answer. Now, some of you might be feeling kind of queasy about this, but a quick way to check if our answer is right is to do what this does. This looks like a fishing question, or multiplying. Let's check to see if we're right. So we think this is our answer. Let's fish this. 3 times x is 3x. There it is. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. There it is. So if our answer, if we multiply it, again, gives us the original question, we know we're right. It's a quick way to check. You don't need the answer key or the back of the book to help you know if you're right or not. Okay? So factoring is basically dividing the terms by the greatest common factor. 7x minus 7. What is the greatest common factor between 7x and minus 7? Well, they don't share a variable, so x is not going to work. But they do share a 7. They both have a 7. So we can pull a 7 out as the factor. Again, for those of you who are liking my old way of doing this, here's the factors. Factors of 7 are 1 and 7. The factors of 7 are 1 and 7. There's only a variable here of x. The greatest factor is 7. That's what I did there, just in my head, or you can work it out. So the GCF was 7. That's what I've done there. Anyways, so now we divide each of these terms by that 7. So 7x divided by 7. 7x divided by 7 is, 7's cancel out, you're left with x. X. Negative 7 divided by 7, we're taking that, dividing that, and you get negative 1. Negative 1. If you need to do the stuff on the side, go right ahead. If you can do it in your head, fantastic. So this is what you're left with. Let's do the double check to make sure that we are correct. Let's do the opposite of what we just did. We just divided this, or factored it. Now it's multiplied to see if we get the same answer again. 7 times x, 7x. 7 times negative 1, negative 7. I'm right. Now you don't have to do the check, but it's handy. Now here, what do we have in common between negative 4w and negative 40? Now with the negative signs, I don't want to commit to saying it's a rule, but if you can, and there's 2 two negative signs there. Try to pull them out. So they both have a negative sign in common. What about the numbers? 4 and 40. Well, 4 can go into 40, so one factor that you can pull out of 4 and 40 is 4. This has a W, that does not have a W, so you can't pull a W out. So negative 4 is our greatest common factor. When we take negative 4W divided by negative 4, negative 4W divided by negative 4, the negative 4's are gone, you're left with W. And that's what we have here. Negative 4's are gone, you're left with W. Negative 40 divided by negative 4, negative 40 divided by negative 4, I don't know why I'm talking in that voice, but whatever. You're left with 10. Negative 40, you're left with 10. Positive 10, by the way. Careful of the signs. Let's check if we're right. Negative 4 times W is negative 4W. Negative 4 times positive 10 is negative 40. We're done. What's the common factor between the 12 and the 5? Well, nothing, actually, just 1. If you want to pull out a 1 and draw a 1 there, go right ahead. But you don't really need to. Why 1, you're saying? Well, write it out on the side. I won't do it for this one. But also 5 does not go into 12. And neither do any of the factors of 5, which is just 1 of 5 anyways. Let's take a look at the y's. We got 2 y's there. We got 1 y there. We have at least 1 y, so we can say that a common factor between these two is y. So we are saying that 1 y is a common factor between these two things. But let's just get rid of the y. No one does that. That's just lame. So we pull a y out of these two terms. What are we left with? When I say pull out, that means we divide this by y. We're left with 12y squared divided by y. We're left with 12. And then y squared minus y is just y. So we're left with 12y. We pull a y out of here. We're left with just 5. You don't believe me? 5y divided by 5. Oh, sorry. Divided by y is y's cancel out of 5. Again, with the negative signs, you can either over here do that and go negative 5y divided by y, and that's going to give you negative 5, or you can just leave the negative sign there and just work with positive 5y. So just be careful of the negative signs. And we're done. Quick check. Y times 12y is 12y squared. Y times negative 5 is negative 5y. We're right. Okay, what's the common factor between this here? Numbers are not common. But this, and again, you treat the x's and y separately. This has 2 x's. That has 1 x. So they both have at least 1 x. That's common. This has 3 y's. This has 1 y. They both have at least 1 y. So either by doing the long way from the last lesson over here or figuring out that x, y, these are your common factors. When we divide this by x, y, you're left with x and y squared. And when you divide xy divided by xy, x divided by x is 1, y divided by y is 1, you're left with 1. You have to include that 1. You just can't say it's 0. That variable, that term right there, divided by that term there is 1. When we do the double check, you'll see why. This times that, x times x is x squared. Y times y squared, y cubed. And then xy times 1 is just xy. We're right. 3x cubed minus 6x squared minus 15. There's 3 terms here. No big deal. Don't freak out about it. What is a common factor with all these numbers? You can do it on the side and figure it out, or you can do it in your head and realize that 3 goes into all 3 numbers. What about the x's? This has 3 x's, this has 2 x's, that has 1 x. Well, they all have at least one x in common. It's like, sort of think that this guy, because it has the least number of x's, limits how many x's we can use here. The weakest link here is that 1x we have at least. So, oops, I shouldn't have put the brackets there yet. 3 and x. So 3x is what all of these guys have in common. When we pull 3x out of 3x cubed, you're left with x squared. We okay with that? If you're not, on the side here again, 3x cubed divided by 3x. 3's cancel out. Exponent rules, x squared. 3 minus 1 is 2. When we pull a 3x out of here, you're left with 2. 2x is 1x, just an x. And when we pull the 3x out of this, you're left with 5, and the x's cancel out, you're just left with 5. Again, with the negative signs, you can either just put the negative sign down and then just go that divided by that to give you this, or you can divide negative 6x squared divided by this, and it gets you the same answer. Either way. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you an option here which might confuse some of you. You could have, if you saw, you know what, there's these two negative signs here, and I don't like the look of those negative signs. Here's what you can do, and it's the exact same thing. What you could do is, so that is the answer. If you like it, go with it. But here's another possible answer you could have done. You could have looked at this and go, I don't like these signs, look at these negative signs. You could have pulled, instead of a positive 3x, pulled a negative 3x out. Now if you did that, what are you left with here? If you pull the negative 3x out here, you're left with, well, what you'd end up doing is 3x cubed divided by negative 3x. And when these two divide, you're left with 3 divided by negative 3 is negative 1, but no one puts the 1 in, just put the negative sign. And this gives you x squared. So you can write negative x squared here if you want. Then if we pull a negative 3 out of there, then it's like going negative 6x squared divided by negative 3x. The negatives negative divided by negative is positive. 6 divided by 3 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. So we've now turned it into positive 2x. Now what do you think is going to happen in the last step? If instead of pulling out the positive 3, we pull out a negative 3, well then negative 15x divided by negative 3x, negative 15 divided by negative 3 is positive 5. The x's cancel out, you're left with positive 5. Doing the double check, we know that this works out. It does. This also works out. Negative 3x times negative x squared gives you positive x cubed. Negative this times positive that gives you negative 6x squared. So you have options with the negative signs. Okay, so both of them are right. This probably looks a little neater. You don't want to have negative signs out front, but there you go. Last one. This is a little ugly for some people, perhaps. What is the common factor between these two things? First of all, what's happening here? Well, this is just multiplying that. It's just like up here. The 3 was just multiplying the x cubed, and the 6 was multiplying the x squared. The 2 is multiplying this thing. Yeah, it's a little funny looking, but it's still just multiplying. And this w is just multiplying that. So what do they both have in common? What does this term have in common with that term? Well, the numbers they don't have in common. This one is a w, that one doesn't have a w. But this term and that term both have an x plus y. So our greatest common factor here is x plus y. When we pull an x plus y out of here, what are we left with? Just 2. Again, on the side, 2 bracket x plus y divided by x plus y. They cancel out, you're left with just 2. When we pull an xy out of here, what are we left with? Just w. And that's it. There's your answer. Alright, so a little tricky, but that does work and it does come in handy later on. Here, way down here, are your skill testing questions. Question that I just did is like this one here, so but there's the 5 you need to do. Show them to me and we'll talk. Thanks, bye.